Force of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this pickup from my Remarkable Retail podcast with Steve Dennis, America's #1 retail industry podcast, renowned author, entrepreneur, and leadership teacher Seth Godin returns to the podcast to discuss his incredibly timely and urgent new book, The Song of Significance, a new manifesto for teams. Let's listen in now.
All right. Well, Seth Godin, welcome back to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. We're going to have to get you one of those 5-timer jackets like they have on Saturday Night Live, I think. I think this might be your 5th time. Does that sound about right to you? It's
always amazing that you have me back. So thanks for giving me another chance to get it right.
All right. Well, we're going to keep doing this until we get it right. But it's great to have you back. Now, there's always plenty to talk about, but the particular thing we're talking about is your new book, The Song of Significance, which actually is going to come out the day that we're releasing this episode. So that's very nice timing. But tell us about this book. What was the motivation? How did you come about with this idea amongst all the other books you've written?
There's so many different ways into it, but as often, we should probably start with Amazon. Half of all the warehouse injuries in the entire country happened at Amazon last year. In 2021, an internal memo at Amazon said that in some cities, they have had so much turnover that they believe they have run out of people in the entire city who are willing to come work for them. What I learned from watching Amazon's race to the bottom, combined with watching brutal billionaires subjecting their employees to ridiculous public humiliation, combined with AI and outsourcing, is there's a fork in the road. And sometimes when you see a fork in the road, you should take it. And one side of the fork is, are we going to race to the bottom and maximize convenience and low price at all costs? Or are we going to race to the top and bring humanity back to work? And I felt this time in particular like it was personal, and I basically was lucky enough that my editor let me rant, and it has resonated with the people who read it so far. They moved it up 6 months, which they never do, because it's timely and it's urgent.
I think one of the statements you make right at the beginning is that work isn't working. And what do you mean by that? I think that resonates with a lot of people, but what in particular do you mean?
Well, so here's the first question. Is the purpose of culture to enable capitalism? Or is the purpose of capitalism to enable us to have the lives we want to live? And when industrialism and department stores and everything else came hand in hand with mass media, we created an enormous amount of productivity and wealth. And people said, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it for me to go to the factory every day because of what I can do for my family. But in the last 10 or 15 years, as so many organizations have struggled to become ever more hyper efficient, to honor Milton Friedman's edict to make more money for the CEO, they haven't created a place where people feel like people. I think what it means to say work isn't working is it's working for the boss. It might be working for some shareholders, but it's not working for the people who are sacrificing 90,000 hours of their life, and we can do better than that.
What strikes me as interesting as I'm in the same situation that Steve is, that you are. I don't in some ways have a dog in the fight or dog in the hunt around working in offices, because I haven't worked in an office in a long time. So it's interesting that it catches your attention, because there's a lot of energy around the dialogue of where and how people work right now. Did that also get you thinking about that? Because there's what we call the work from home or work anywhere or hybrid work, and it seems to be sticking, and there's a big push and pull, and between threatening employees to come back versus cajoling them versus enticing them to come back. Did this all kind of swirl around your thinking around at least corporate work?
Well, what a profound shift in the environment of the industrialized world to, in a 4-week period of time, without the economy missing much of a beat, suddenly millions and millions and millions and millions of people aren't getting their dry cleaning done, have established an office that isn't where their office is. Well, it was inevitable once we had Zoom and the internet. But the real interesting question is, why do bosses care so much? And I think the reason they care is similar to the reason that open hiring has had such a difficult time getting adopted. So I'll talk about open hiring first. If you've ever had Ben & Jerry's ice cream, you may have had the brownie flavor. They make all of the brownies for Ben & Jerry's brownie ice cream 4 miles from my house at the Greyston Bakery, which was founded by a Buddhist monk named Bernie Glassman. And one of the things that they do is they have a clipboard at the front desk, and anyone who wants to can put their name on the clipboard. And when a job opens up, the next person on the list gets hired. Doesn't matter if you're previously incarcerated, doesn't matter if you've had a drug problem, doesn't matter if you've never had a job. The next person gets hired. This is called open hiring. And it is an extraordinarily important way to build resilience and redemption into our communities. But not that many companies have adopted it, even though they work very hard to share the technique. The Body Shop did. The Body Shop was having a lot of trouble filling jobs and a lot of trouble with turnover. They adopted open hiring, and they discovered turnover went down 60%, and productivity on all of their measures went up 15%. This is in the retail environment. And yet, even in the face of that, most organizations don't do it because the boss wants to think that they have some sort of special instinct about who would be good at this job. And the boss also finds peace of mind in surveilling their employees, making sure, quote, they're really working, calling Zoom meetings to make sure that people who are remote are in their chairs paying attention.
Turn your camera on.
And all of those things are false proxies. They're false proxies for what actually makes a difference. Now that we're getting so much smarter at what creates value, we're finding it's painful but urgent that we get rid of the false proxies.
But I think it's a really interesting point, but there seems to me like there's a lot of things where the evidence is overwhelmingly in support of taking a particular set of actions, yet people still don't do it. And so I'm wondering, would you agree? I think you would agree with that, right? It's not a matter of the data supporting a particular set of actions. It's a matter of people's mindset and their fear or their need for this illusion of control and so forth. How would you suggest and I know you go into this in the book, but can you give our audience a little bit of a sense of how you would suggest making this change towards providing or creating more significance in the work that teams and their organizations do?
Because you're Steve, I can tell you just how audacious I am seeking to be here. Most people who hear about this say, oh, sure, let's create things that make people feel significant at work. They're just lying to themselves because making people feel significant at work is not the same as making people actually significant at work. And you can't, the same way when the internet came along, there were a lot of skeuomorphs. There was a lot of, this is just like the real world, except click on the picture of a book as opposed to touch the book. That's not what you could do if you wanted to do what was best for the internet. That it's not just the real world, but with a mouse. It's different. Email is not just a postal letter, but faster. The post-industrial workforce is not just like the industrial workforce, except with better snacks and a feeling of significance. It's different. Because what we now know is that mediocre work and any work that can be written down in a spec can either be done by an AI or outsourced really cheap. You don't need to go out of your way to pay people to do that work the way you used to. So what's left? What's left is this human work of making a change happen. You can't just say, well, I'm going to let a little bit of light into this place because it's still a dank basement. What you have to do is say, we are going to create value for people by raising our standards and making a change for the customer, a change in the side effects, a change for the employees, a significant change. Because when a change happens, we find meaning in that work. And people will, yes, pay $80 for an $8 t-shirt if it comes with meaning. The retailers who are trying to out Amazon are just going to keep failing. And it was interesting. David Risher, who was one of the architects of Amazon, left there to do some stuff, and now he's back as the CEO of Uber. And he just ordered, and I use that word carefully, he just ordered all employees back to headquarters at least 3 days a week. He came up with this nonsense about magic can happen when you have a whiteboard in front of people.
Yeah.
But what he's really saying is he's too lazy and too scared to reimagine a different sort of work, a distributed sort of work, the work that powers automatic, the work that creates movements. That work doesn't require people to go to the office. It simply requires people to find meaning.
Let's unpack a couple of things I hear a lot when speaking to retail other CEOs. They talk about the productivity being fantastic from work from home or work from wherever or hybrid. What they worry about is a couple of things. One is, and I'd love you to get your thoughts on this. One is that the younger employees don't have mentors or mentorship and attachment to the culture. And the second is just, what you were just saying. And I think there's no demonstrable proof that it happens. This water cooler talk doesn't happen. The inspiration in the parking lot kind of stuff where we're not generating new ideas. Innovation is hard or can't happen. Take on both of those one at a time. The whole thing that there is a deficit. If you're a young person sitting at home, maybe you're just sitting at home alone in a little concrete box. It's not that fun. You're not meeting people. A lot of people meet their partners in workplace. How do we square this circle and get the best of both worlds?
Oh, I remember visiting our erstwhile colleague Steve in Chicago and walking the halls of Sears and noting just how many people were in the hall having substantial conversations, honest interactions with each other, mentoring and teaching. Oh, no, that was a different building. The fact this is just because there's cubicles doesn't mean that there are interactions happening. When I was at Yahoo, the back room where I was a cube farm with more than 1,000 people on one floor. And there was none of that because you have to do it on purpose. And it's easier to do it on purpose online. That, no matter how hard Elon Musk has tried for the last 6 months, he just can't kill Twitter. People just are having trouble leaving. Why is that? The whole place is online, and yet people get hooked. They get hooked on their circle. They get hooked on the interactions. They get hooked on what they can say and what they can hear. And if you do it on purpose, you can do it online. And I just think it's so dramatically overrated, this sort of random bumping into people at the water cooler. The water cooler is not that busy a place.
I guess I'm curious, Seth. I mean, it's hard to separate exactly what you said in the book versus things I've heard you say over the years or you've written about in your blog, taking on kind of meeting culture and meetings in general. Do you have any thoughts on what meetings should be for, how to make the best of them, and how they really kind of contribute to this malaise that we're seeing in a lot of corporate cultures?
And this is a great topic for this particular podcast, because what do retailers actually make? Because they don't make the stuff they sell generally. What they make is decisions. Meetings are often misnamed. A real meeting, is a conversation in which lots of people who are in it, more than 80%. So if there's two people, that means both, are talking and listening, moving toward a decision. This is different than a mandatory group lecture in which one person who was too lazy to write a good memo or edit a good 5-minute video calls everyone together so they can share their thoughts out loud as they think of them. And this is very common. And it's done as an exercise in status and in taking attendance. It's an artifact similar to going to 4th grade fractions class. But that doesn't help us make better decisions. And we have lots of ways to have actual meetings. But first, the person who's calling the meeting has to be willing to have one, as opposed to just be taking attendance.
Seth, are you familiar with the concept of holacracy? I had the opportunity to interview, I can't say he was the CEO, but because he described his role differently from Freitag, which is a great company that makes bags out of recycled truck tarps in Europe. But he described the holacracy. Is this closer to the pin about how you envision the workplace being successful?
Tony Hsieh, what a tragic story, R.I.P. He was the loudest proponent of it in the U.S. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to do at all, and certainly to retrofit into an existing organization. I think it could be argued that Zappos left billions of dollars in value on the table as they tried to shift into that. What I learned from building the Carbon Almanac with 300 other people, all volunteers, including me, is it is possible to relentlessly raise standards. It is possible to be unbelievably productive, especially if you spend very little time talking about the process of the process. That when you show people the board, they can play the board game. But if you're going to have to spend half your time arguing about the rules, it's really challenging. So are there holacracies in the world? For sure. But I don't think it matches with the power dynamic that customers require of, you made me a promise, I expect you to keep it and exceed it.
You know, a lot of times when I read your stuff, I'm certainly very inspired, but I'm also, I guess, colored by my time either working at or working for very large corporations. In many cases, these are publicly traded companies. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on how hard it is to get started on some of these things when you're part of a much bigger organization, particularly if you're at the top of that organization, and you perceive anyway that you have to kowtow to quarterly earnings and expectations of, driving top line sales, ever increasing productivity, those sort of things, which tend to be much more short term oriented. And it feels to me like some of the things you were suggesting here, while you can make some small starts, to really make a big change might take quite a lot of effort over quite a long period of time.
Yeah, this is almost precisely what they said at Western Union when they had the chance to buy AT&T. It's also what Toyota said when the electric car showed up, and everything in between. That you are absolutely correct in everything that you said. And your competition, perhaps more adroit, perhaps differently funded, is going to do it. So then what are you going to do?
Right.
And what we have seen from Sears and Macy's and Lord & Taylor and all the others is you can do what the stock market wants tomorrow, but you might not be here next year to tell us about it. Mm-hmm. Or you can take a deep breath and realize that if what we make is decisions and a different approach to making decisions and then implementing them is going to satisfy a new marketplace faster, better, more profitably, either you're going to do it or somebody else is. So I'm not asking anybody who runs an organization to settle for less. What I'm saying is humans are not a resource. Humans are the point. And shifting fundamentally away from Peter Drucker to a different set of expectations and interactions is happening right here, right now. And if you want the kind of people who have a choice about where to work, this is the only way you're going to be able to dance with them.
Yeah, I think, and it's something I'm working on, as you and I have talked about in my new book, is that I think there's a fundamental misperception of a lot of companies about what the riskiest thing is, right? Like it's really the opposite of what they often think that is riskiest, right? It's the failure to make these bold changes or to get started now, as opposed to when they get forced into reactivity. That is really the most risky decision.
Also, this is a fine time. First of all, I can't wait to read the new book, but this is a fine time to invoke Schumpeter, which is, it's okay if companies go out of business and are replaced by the next thing. When the airlines were whining during COVID for a bailout, you know what? We should have let them go out of business because the planes weren't going to go away and the airports weren't going to go away, and we could have refactored how they were organized and kept flying. Mm-hmm. And if you are really stuck because you made the mistake of selling ownership in your company to short-term thinking people who are underinformed, then maybe you should go work somewhere else and do something important instead.
Seth, this is a fantastic discussion. I mean, it's a lot to get your arms around, and I'm thinking of our listeners who are somewhere in an organization, perhaps in a leadership role. What are the kind of 1, 2, or 3 steps that you talk about in the book and that you think yourself to get started on this journey, to really rethink and become the brownie supplier type company to just change from what you do today. I mean, if we took it all the way back to the beginning, Amazon's purposeful, very purposeful. They like turnover. It's in their policy. So go all the way to where you think we should be. And what are the kind of couple practical steps you can begin with? There's one practical step that has to be before any of them. And it's a simple sentence. And Manad Khosla put it on the title of his book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. What Jeff Bezos did in the first 3 years of Amazon is extraordinary. He made a clear statement to every employee, every investor, every senior leader, let's get real or let's not play. We're going to have a different way we do meetings. We're going to have a different way we track growth. We're going to have a different way. This is what we are building here, a thing, a better thing, a new thing, a different thing. Having the conversation about what would it be like if we made a commitment to each other. I promise to pay attention in your meeting if you promise not to call a meeting that could be replaced by a memo. Let's get real or let's not play. We can go down the list of the kinds of interactions. Let's agree that we will relentlessly criticize the work and raise our standards, and we will never criticize the worker. Let's embrace the fact that turnover is a good thing if it means that the people here are enrolled in where we are going, not simply here because they can't find a better job. In the book, I outline about 15 of these, and I also ask 150 different questions throughout the book. Let's talk about it, because pretending that we're going to get to the other side of this and go back to normal is extraordinarily naive. This is the new normal, and this is as stable as the world is ever going to be again. And last question from my side, then I'll pass the mic back to Steve to wrap up. But you've written a lot of books. You write constantly. How do you get excited? Are you excited about this book more than the others, or is that like asking people about which is their favorite kid? Like, how do you think of that when your latest book comes out? Steve has heard me say it before that I'm done with publishing, and
I was going to bring that up. The number of times you've told me that this is my last book, I'm never writing another one again. And then, like, I got a new book coming out next week.
It's a silly thing to do because you can spread an idea, a certain kind of idea, to more people faster in other ways. But this one is personal. This is the one that has moved me to tears while I was writing it, and even sometimes when I talk about it on the podcast. This is the one that I feel like I have been getting ready to write for a long time. I don't wake up in the morning saying to myself, I need to write a book now. I used to. That's what I did for a living. I don't anymore. Now it's a sacrifice. But when I brought this book to my editor and Nikki said, we need to move this up, that this is urgent, I felt something inside of me that I hadn't felt in a long time. This is something I need to say, and I feel very different about this one.
Well, that's probably a good place to end it. I'm not sure what I could really add to that, but I would, you were nice enough to share an early version of the book with me. I really loved it, and I would very much encourage people to go check it out. And I think I didn't know there were 150 questions, but I thought, I found so many of those questions to be really, really provocative and really challenging. And if you want an inspiring read, but also something that really causes you to question how we got here, what we're doing, I think this is the book for you. So thanks, Seth, again for joining us. We'll send you your 5-timer jacket in the mail shortly, and I'm sure you'll wear it proudly on future appearances. Thanks so much, Seth.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Steve. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Consumer Growth Consultant, President of M.E. LeBlanc Company Inc, Maven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.